hopeful that Luis Gutierrez's leadership will be successful in Washington, D.C., and we'll get a comprehensive reform that is beneficial to our community. But I'm also mindful of the history of immigration reform. The last immigration reform that we did that had an legalization component, IRCA in 1986, also had a repressive component, employer sanctions, that drove immigrants further underground and made them even more exploitable. And I'm concerned that this kind of something good and something bad formula will be combined again in this reform. I hope not, but I draw inspiration from the African American example of the civil rights movement, in which, and I think this is a little known fact, civil rights did not come to America in one bill in 1964. So literally what you had was an 11-year wave of good bills that addressed the problem. And my point is, this cycle, we should get the best deal possible, but it should be a good deal. And if we don't, then we should continue, given that they say we have all this political power, 15 million registered voters, next cycle will be 18 million, then it'll be 20 million. Given that we have all this political power, that this fight may go on, and if we don't get a good bill, we should continue to fight for a good bill.
Enter Ana Navarro, Republican political strategist. Give me your read as to whether or not there is going to be bipartisanship forthcoming on this issue.
I don't think there's going to be bipartisanship. I think there is bipartisanship. And we are seeing what we don't see in Congress or in Washington, in this White House. We haven't seen it in many years, where legislation is actually emanating out of the legislative branch. They're doing it on their own. They're doing it in a bipartisan fashion. We're talking about the President Obama that just won a re-election with 71% of the Latino vote and understands there is a debt and we will not let him off the hook a second time. And he better understand, as need to understand Republicans also, that he's dealing with a much more sophisticated, seasoned, scarred Hispanic community that understands when we are being played. I think both parties at this point understand that the cost of not doing it is far greater than the cost of doing it.
So Congressman Gutierrez, Antonio Gonzalez, Ana Navarro have all, in their own way, talked about the history of this fight and this struggle where immigration is concerned. Hence, my wanting to make sure that a historian was on the panel today to help us properly contextualize this. So without coloring the question too much, vis-a-vis the history, David, what are your thoughts about what you've heard so far on this immigration conversation?
Well, I'd like to weave together a couple of points I've heard over the last few minutes. I think this point about political leadership is critical. I mean, the political leadership of each state and of the nation obviously not only sets the policy agenda, but it influences the political culture that we live in. And so what we see in Arizona, for example, this politics of paranoia or fear, by the way, a classic Southern gambit, by the way. You know, this is a well practiced in Southern politics to create a boogeyman, usually race. If not race, then your criminal element or labor, communist labor unions, whatever. I mean, that's essentially what's going on in Arizona, where you have a number of essentially opportunistic politicians using the politics of fear and paranoia in order to gain election and promote their own campaigns. The only way to change this is through, we need courageous political leadership to stand up, take a firm stand, and say this is not what our country's about.
Earlier, Hector Barreto used the word environment 3 or 4 times by my count. The environment that he was talking about was an environment that needed to be more friendly to small business in America. But the environment that I now want to talk about is the environment that many of these persons that we're talking about giving a path to citizenship have to navigate every single day. And in my research, I discovered, which didn't surprise me, that not unlike the African American community or other poor communities, this issue of environmental racism is real. So I wanted to make sure that in this conversation that we had Adriana Quintero, who is with the National Resources Defense Council. So this is the work that she does every single day at NRDC. And I wonder if you just might, we'll get deeper into this, Adriana, but I wonder if you might just give me give us some sense of what the issues are vis-a-vis the environment.
Yeah, Tavis, it's really important, and I'm glad that you tied it back into what Congressman Gutierrez said, because that's exactly it. I mean, the reason we have people dying daily is because many of these people are in the shadows. They can go unaccounted for. They can be ignored. If a child lives here in the Chicago area, in Pilsen, they've had to deal with walking outside and having some of the highest asthma rates in the country. Same thing happens in Los Angeles. 1 out of 2 Latinos, very similar to African Americans in fact, is living in an area that does not meet air quality standards today. And the reason it ties in so closely to immigration is because until we have a way to empower people to actually speak up for themselves, protect themselves, they're going to be continuously discriminated against environmentally as well. So whether it's sightings or whether it's simply having to pay more for health care simply because you are subject to trucks running through your neighborhood constantly and this absolute disregard for these communities' needs and health, you're going to have a disproportionate impact, and that's what we have today.
So let me segue then back to